In any other week, this next story would be the lead story. But it got totally drowned out by the Vince McMahon stuff. But this is a story that can and will have major repercussions on the wrestling business, and WWE in particular, if this goes through. If the FTC gets its way, non-compete agreements will become a thing of the past. This is from the New York Times on Thursday. I mean, when was the last time you heard me quoting from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal in the same episode, right? That's how you know this is a big week. It says, in a far-reaching move that could raise wages and increase competition among businesses, the Federal Trade Commission on Thursday unveiled a rule that would block companies from limiting their employees' ability to work for a rival. The proposed rule would ban provisions of labor contracts known as non-compete agreements, which prevent workers from leaving for a competitor or starting a competing business for months or years after their employment, often within a certain geographic area. The agreements have applied to workers as varied as sandwich makers, hairstylists, doctors, and software engineers. And as we well know, professional wrestlers. The FTC proposal is the latest in a series of aggressive and sometimes unorthodox moves to rein in the power of large companies under the agency's chair, Linda Khan. We got Nick Khan, we got Tony Khan, now we got Lena Khan. Did I say Linda? I meant Lena. Lena Khan. If only Genghis Khan were still around, right? What a foursome that would be. The public will be allowed to submit comments on the proposal for 60 days, at which point the agency will move to make it final. An FTC document said the rule would take effect 180 days after the final version is published, but experts said that it could face legal challenges. The agency estimated that the rule could increase wages by nearly $300 billion a year across the economy. About half the states in the U.S. significantly constrain the use of non-competes, and a small number have deemed them largely unenforceable, including California. But even in such states, companies often include non-competes in employment contracts, and many workers in these states report turning down job offers, partly as a result of the provisions, suggesting that these state regulations may have limited effects. Many workers in those states are not necessarily aware that the provisions are unenforceable. And here's where the article gets interesting if you are a wrestling observer, if you're a wrestling fan. The Commission's proposal also requires employers to withdraw existing non-competes and to inform workers that they no longer apply. The proposal would also make it illegal for an employer to enter into a non-compete with a worker or try to do so, or to suggest that a worker is bound by one when he or she is not. The proposal covers not just employees, but independent contractors, interns, volunteers, and other workers. And that's the key, because we know how wrestlers are classified. They're not employees, they're independent contractors. And I said that barely with a straight face. So this could have a big effect on the pro wrestling world. Right now in WWE, if a talent's contract expires, they are not typically bound by any non-compete. They can appear for a competitor, let's say AEW, and show up on television the very next day if they want to. But if a talent is released early, there's typically a 90-day non-compete to prevent them from walking off WWE television and onto a competitor's show. And they're paid for those 90 days. They might even be making more to sit at home and collect their money for those 90 days than they would going somewhere else to work. But right now, as things are, they don't have that option. For an NXT talent that gets released, the period is 30 days instead of 90. This would change that. So in theory, if someone was released by WWE for whatever the reason was, right, after showing up on Raw on a Monday, now they could work out a deal with Tony Khan to show up on Dynamite that Wednesday, if this were to go through. Now, there are still things that were not entirely clear to me from this story. This sounds like a blanket ban on all non-compete agreements, based on what I'm reading here. And it's going to be very important, I think, to clarify if that is the case, because legally, I know there are differences between paid and unpaid non-compete agreements. You know, with WWE, the people get paid. A lot of workers in other industries, they don't get paid. Those would be harder to enforce, I would think, if somebody wanted to fight that in court. Yeah, but a lot of these companies know that these people don't have enough money to do that, which is why they don't bother. But if it's a paid non-compete of a reasonable length, that would be a lot harder to fight. All right, we're not talking the 10-year non-compete that Brock Lesnar signed when he left WWE in 2004. Just because he wanted to get the hell out of there, he was willing to sign whatever they put in front of him. And then when he challenged it in court, he didn't win, but he reached a settlement. I mean, he kind of won, but he didn't really win. He settled out of court with WWE, and that allowed him to go work somewhere else, which ended up including the UFC. Because trying to tie somebody down to a 10-year non-compete is completely ludicrous. Right? Now, if they're just going after unpaid non-competes and companies that take advantage of employees and interns who fall under that category, then that would not affect WWE. Or at least not affect them as much as we're talking about here. But in reading this, it sounds like this applies to all types of non-competes. To be honest, I think the independent contractor farce is a much bigger issue than the non-compete stuff is. You know, that would turn the wrestling business on its head if wrestlers were ever classified as employees instead of independent contractors. But every time it's been challenged in court, and it hasn't happened very often, but every time it has, it's never been successful. Even though wrestlers, specifically WWE wrestlers, and what is asked of them and expected of them, absolutely meet the criteria for being considered employees. I mean, the whole thing is just preposterous. The thing to keep in mind with the non-compete stuff, though, if this was to go into effect later this year, what I described before with the WWE talent being released and then walking onto AEW television, let's say days later, would be very unlikely. Because, I mean, think about it. If I'm WWE, and they have not been releasing talent at the rate that Vince McMahon was, but if I was WWE, and I hear about this rule change, I wouldn't want to let go of anybody. Unless they had, years and years left on their deal, and I just felt it wasn't worth it to pay them to sit at home for that long. Otherwise, if the person had, let's say, a year left on their contract, and I thought they could be of value somewhere else, I'm not going to let them go. And this is just me thinking about the way the WWE operates. Not that I would personally do this necessarily, but I would just hold on to them longer to prevent them from going somewhere else, to prevent them from going to AEW. For talent that have a big enough name and could get similar money working somewhere else, they probably wouldn't care as much about not getting paid for 90 days because they have money in the bank and they know that they could just get similar money by signing with Tony Khan. And they'll be okay. Not everybody has that luxury, though. Not everybody has a big name. Not everybody is going to be able to leave WWE and get the same money somewhere else. So for those people, they might like the idea of the 90-day non-compete because at least they know they're getting paid while they have 3 months to figure out what their next move is going to be. It's like 3 months severance. So the devil is in the details, and we don't have all the details yet. But even if we do, not every talent is going to necessarily view this, I think, as a positive. The bigger you are, the better off you'll be. But if you're a mid-card person or a lower-card talent on the WWE roster, you may not feel the same way. Triple H told The Athletic last year that all main roster talent earn at least $250,000 a year. That is the base salary for a Raw or SmackDown talent, which is still a hell of a salary. A lot of those people are not going to be able to go somewhere else right out of the gate and make $250,000 a year. They might be able to work their way up to that, but a lot of them are not going to be able to leave and go make that kind of money on the indies or even necessarily working for AEW. Now, in general, I think this is a great move because this is about more than just pro wrestling, and I think non-competes are dumb, and I think they do stifle wage growth for a lot of workers. I remember reading about non-competes for fast food workers at like Burger King and McDonald's where, and some of you listening to this may have experienced this yourselves, where if you worked at a McDonald's, you couldn't leave to go work for another McDonald's, let's say 5 minutes away to make 50 cents more an hour, or use that as a bargaining chip to get a raise. The whole thing is ridiculous. Now that may have changed when it comes to fast food restaurants. I know there was a movement to end that practice. I don't know if it ever went into effect or not, but if not, then this would eliminate that, and I'm all for it. So this is another story like the potential of a WWE sale that is going to be very interesting and very important if you are a wrestling fan or a wrestler or a wrestling company, to pay attention to and watch and see how it plays out, because it could potentially have a very big effect on the industry.